Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I am Groot.
And I am Groot.
Right, stop that, it's silly. This is Become the Teapot, the podcast where we discuss comic book movies and the comics they're based on. I'm Iain, and I read comics.
And I am Groot. And I'm Iain, and until recently, I didn't. This week, we're watching one of my favourite MCU films, Guardians of the Galaxy.
And you might think we'd be reading Guardians of the Galaxy, but you'd be wrong. No, instead, I'm taking Iain slightly further back and getting him to read Annihilation, Conquest, Starlord by Keith Giffen and Timothy Green II.
So power up your jet boots and let's rocket straight into the episode.
I am Groot.
Right, so it's taken us 26 episodes to get to one of my, if not favourite, MCU film.
Okay, yes, it has. Yeah, we haven't actually done many MCU films, have we?
No, Iron Man 3, Civil War, but I wasn't here.
You were here for Civil War.
Sorry, yep. Oh, yeah.
And Captain America Winter Soldier as well.
Winter Soldier, that one.
Professional.
As always, that's our catchphrase.
Well, what do you think of this one?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It is always good to go back to rewatch this film after seeing like Guardians 2 and Endgame. Although I did find it a bit confusing this time because I've just come off the back of What If when, what's his name, T'Challa becomes Starlord. So my brain got a little bit confused. Not for long.
You got confused because you watched an episode of a show.
Well, yeah.
What was confusing about it?
Oh, I like the fact that I know the What If episodes are only like 30 minutes long, but obviously it explains the whole thing about what if T'Challa was Starlord, which I loved. And then going back to this, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that didn't happen. That's something else entirely. I was weirdly sat there waiting for Yondu to pick up T'Challa, but it was Peter Quill.
Are you okay?
It was just my brain just got confused very quickly.
Okay, fair enough.
Although I did, there's that first bit where he's dancing through that crater place.
Yeah.
Again, I half expected him to get punched by War Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Well, apart from my confusion, what did you think?
Well, I wasn't confused. I'll tell you what. No, I really like it. I really like Guardians of the Galaxy. I think it's one of the better MCU films, probably my top 5. It's weird, actually. I was speaking to our friend Martin yesterday about it, and he's been watching these lately for the first time. He's never really got into the Marvel films. And he hates Guardians of the Galaxy.
He hates it?
It's his least favourites one. Yeah. He just can't get on with them. He says that, he finds the humour and everything just grates on him. Whereas I really like it. So I didn't want it to just be us sitting here going, yeah, it was great. Yeah. I liked it as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
So there are other opinions out there, but I do disagree with him on that. So no, I really like it. I think it's very, very well paced, self-contained. I almost like with the MCU when things are more self-contained. Okay to have references to other things, but save the big crossovers and all that for the Avengers films.
Yeah.
And then make your own films within their own right, rather than just a building block for a greater universe.
Yeah.
So this actually feels like its own thing.
Wow.
Even though it's set in the MCU.
Wow. Apart from the collector's exposition about all the stones, which I didn't quite understand because it wasn't portrayed on silver abs.
It might as well have been, though. It was very reminiscent of Fantastic Four 2, yeah. And then, of course, there was the shoehorning in of Thanos, as well.
Thanos.
He seemed a bit superfluous to the plot, but that's a fairly minor quibble.
Yeah, I mean, taking those things out, I do believe that if someone hadn't seen any of the MCU films and just saw this, or this was their first one, apart from the odd, you would understand it.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of... Well, we talked about this in a previous episode when we mentioned Endgame. I don't believe anyone is watching that film having not seen the 20 films leading up to it. It only makes sense within the context of the greater MCU, whereas this, yes, okay, there are those tie-ins with the Infinity Stones and all that, but you can watch this on its own.
Yeah.
You can watch it as its own thing and enjoy it for the fun characters, each of which is sort of laid out and well-defined in itself, and say, we're going to introduce you to essentially 5 brand new people. We're going to give each of them time to shine, a taste of each of their personalities. And I think it does a really good job at all of that.
Yeah, that's what James Gunn does so well in this. You know, it's not Captain America or Iron Man. I know they weren't huge when those first films came out, but he's managed to create a film where he's introduced all the characters, and in my opinion, very well.
Yeah.
And then also introduce this threat and create a great plot to bring them all together.
Yeah.
It's a ragtag bunch of space people.
The ragtag space
Which I
people.
think was the tagline.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, my only real negative about the film is probably Ronan, the villain. I think he's definitely sidelined in favour of establishing the team.
Yeah.
And I think, Lee Pace, is it, the actor, he does a good enough job with what he has to work with, but unfortunately it doesn't make for the most fleshed out villain because there's so much focus on the heroes.
Yeah.
So he ends up as just sort of basically a Kree fundamentalist. And I think that's... What makes that worse for me is the fact that in the comics, especially around the time of the comic books we'll be talking about today, he's very much more a heroic character. He's more an anti-hero or an anti-villain. He's still firm in his beliefs and he's still very much a Kree enthusiast, but there's sort of a nobility to him as well.
Yeah.
So seeing him in the film where that is completely absent is just an odd interpretation. But other than that, that's a fairly minor complaint in the grand scheme of things. I think it's definitely not one that's unique to this film in the MCU, or any films in general, to be fair. And I think if you had focused more on Ronan and less on the Guardians, or if you had just made the film longer so you could focus on it more, I think both of those things would have been worse for the film. So I'm glad they did it this way around. It's just a bit of a shame,
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's evil for evil's sake, but he's very close to that line.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, his sort of plot in this, I guess, or his arc is that he's been told by Thanos to go and find this orb and blah, blah. As soon as he realises the power of that orb, that's when he's like, well, actually, what I've asked you to do, to kill this world, I now have the power to it, so I don't need your help anymore. So there's a little bit of character building where he changes his mind and he goes against what he was going to do originally. So he's not just evil, he's not a bad guy because he's a bad guy. You've got a little bit of thing in
No,
there.
I'd say he was evil. I'd say he was just evil for evil's sake. He starts off wanting to destroy Xandar. He decides he can do it himself when he gets the stone. I don't think that's necessarily... His opinion hasn't changed. The first time we see him, he's killing people and bathing in their blood,
Oh, yeah.
He's very much, I am a Kree fundamentalist and I want to kill all Xandarians. I want to sort of commit genocide.
Yeah.
How he goes about that is the only thing that really changes. So, I'd say he's a fairly black and white villain here. I quite like seeing him crop up again in Captain Marvel. That was quite nice. And hopefully they can do more of that. Same way they did with Korath in this. He cropped up in that as well. So it'd be nice if they could flesh him out through other means. But yeah, he just definitely, to me, just seemed like placeholder villain number 4. It could have been anyone. We could have just changed that character's name to any other space-based villain and it would have been roughly the same.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I know that it is a little bit shoehorned into it, but James Gunn lays down some history and some of the groundwork for Thanos.
Yeah.
Because he does refer to Gamora as his favourite child, or his daughter, which it's just a comment, it's just a line. But then as you start to watch the rest of the films and to the build up to Endgame when, it's true that he loves her. So just by a little line here, they've actually carried that through.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, I don't know if it was the original intent of the line, but I like going back and watching these things and picking up on things you wouldn't have done the first time around that wouldn't have had as much impact. It's one of the things that makes the second Avengers film, Age of Ultron, better in retrospect is because they then built on a lot of the things that happen in that film.
Yeah.
I've got to say, the first time round I watched it, I thought it was a little bit of a dud as far as the MCU goes, but a lot of that stuff has been worked on later and has been made better just by following up on things, really.
Yeah, they don't quite retcon things in the MCU, but they build on it. So if something's fallen on its face, they'll kind of come back to it and go, well, actually, that thing that didn't quite work out, it does make sense because 4 films down the line,
Yeah, often those things that they throw in are distracting rather than helpful. I mean, Thor's dream sequence in Age of Ultron, I still don't really know what that's about. That's one of the few items where I feel like they did just kind of went, let's just ignore that. Let's move on.
I think they did cut a scene where he got covered in mud, so he had to go have a bath.
He had to have a little bath, yeah. He got it in his hair, didn't he? That was it. And it was a catchphrase of Thor in early drafts was like, I hate having mud in my hair. And the big payoff for that was that he got mud in his hair and he had to have a bath.
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah?
Yeah, that was the one.
Okay. Shame that was missed.
Shall we stop talking about characters that weren't in the film?
Okay.
And start talking about characters that were in the film?
Sure. Which characters would you like to speak about?
Well, let's just start off with Starlord then. So the main antagonist, he's the
main antagonist.
Protagonist. He's the bad guy in this. That's what I think.
That's a unique take, and I can't wait to see how it goes.
Well, no, yeah. So the film starts with a horrific scene, really. It's horrifically sad.
Yeah.
So you're introduced to this kid, which you have no idea who he is. He's just some kid. He could be killed off in the next scene. I don't know. I wouldn't put that past James Gunn.
No.
We'll come on to that at the end of the podcast. But yeah, I mean, you really feel his sadness and just the horror that he's been through. And then he runs away just to sort of get outside and escape what's just happened. And then he gets abducted.
Yeah.
And he's in space.
It's a bold way of opening a film, is to have a 10-minute sequence with a child and a dying mother in what is essentially a superhero action movie.
Yeah.
And what should be this a summer blockbuster popcorn eating film. And instead we start with some slow music and, a mother slowly dying in hospital and a child running away. It's quite a bold move.
It's not how you think the film should start, really.
No, exactly. Obviously then we crash cut over to the modern day, as it were, and we have him trekking around on that planet. And from there on out, to be honest, it jumps between these planets and these scenes at a really good pace, and just fair old clop, you just plow through all these things. And what that first scene allows you to do is it gives you an instant sympathy for Peter Quill, sets him up from an emotional perspective, and it has a narrative payoff later in the film. So yeah, it ticks 3 big boxes. It makes sense.
And it also has a payoff in the sequel too, because his mum says, your dad was an angel. Which you kind of think, oh, she's dying. She's not that well currently. So her brain's probably not working as it should be. And you think, oh, it's just her interpretation of his dad. But then the sequel comes around, you're like, oh, okay. So again, that little line pays off.
Yeah, well, that was at the end of this film as well, where they reveal that Peter Quill is alien ancestry, is half alien, but they don't know what. It was some ancient being that they've never seen. A bit of a change from the comics, that is, making it Ego, the living planet, as opposed to whoever it was, Jason of Spartax.
Yeah. Oh, actually, funny you say that, because I don't know if this is an egg or not. I think it's something that I just realised. Peter's middle name is Jason, which I like how James Gunn just popped that in there. I think people assumed that would be the way if we saw his father in the future.
Yeah, I kind of assumed it would be, but I suppose it doesn't make any sense with regards to the line at the end of it about him being some ancient and unknown alien entity. It was if it was just the Spartaxes, then it would have been like, we know who they are. They're our neighbours on that planet over there.
I do like Chris Pratt taking on this role. I think he suits it down to a T. People might compare him to sort of the cockiness, arrogance of Tony Stark in ways.
In a way, perhaps. He's got that quippy nature, but I think he suffers more from Arrested Development. He's more childlike.
I don't think he was on that show. He was on Parks and Rec.
Ah, I see.
But you're going to put in like some tumbleweed there.
I'm not going to do anything with this. Leaving this as is.
I think...
Oh, so how am I going to put in tumbleweed in an audio medium?
You figure it out. Right, well, the rest of the Guardians then. So when they come together, it's not your standard fare, is it? It's not like, oh, here's your group and now you're all friends. They are very much chucked into one when they go into the prison.
Yeah.
It's not the fact, oh, this is my friend, he's going to be the pilot, and this is my buddy, and this is his wife, and blah, blah. They realise that they're better off together, and they probably have more chance of surviving than they do on their own.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's quite a standard setup, is that at first they're enemies, or at least antagonistic towards each other, and then through a shared interest or a shared goal, they come together and have to work together, and then they begrudgingly come to like each other instead. So it is quite a standard setup and quite a standard trope. It's actually, we'll talk about this towards the end, but pretty much the same thing we get with the Suicide Squad, the new one, James Gunn. So it's something I think he does well. But it is, it's a fairly standard setup. But what I think it does a good job of doing, though, is establishing each person's role on that team without necessarily having someone say, this is what this person does on the team. However, having said that and being halfway through that sentence, I realised that exact thing does happen when they're all in that police lineup and someone comes on and goes, this is this guy, this is his powers. It's even written on the screen. So, yeah, ignore everything I've just said.
Well, no, I think that you do have a point there because it's built into the story. You know, they've been captured. You would expect that to happen. It's not just like smash cut of all this text on screen and then going, oh, this is the bad boy of the group. What? Hey, check him out.
You mean the SuiSquad method?
The SuiSquad. No, sorry, just SuiSquad.
SuiSquad method, sorry.
But no, I think I would say that Star-Lord's my favourite character in this purely because of Chris Pratt. But I think Rocket is my second favourite. I think we've got a lot of backstory that we don't know about yet, which is why I'm excited for Guardians 3, because that's said to go into his backstory and who he is as a character and all of this stuff. But yeah, I always forget how sort of sad his backstory is, at least the way this film portrays it. You see it when he comes out of the shower with all the little bolts on his back. He hates everyone pretty much because he's had that kind of life. So again, James Gunn is really clever at world building and creating this intrigue around these characters.
Yeah, I definitely think he does a better job of it in this than he does in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And I don't know if that's because this had another writer and Guardians of the Galaxy was only written by James Gunn. But like you say, Rocket's backstory is not overtly said. You see a few things here and there, and then some of the stuff he says. And then obviously there's the scene where they're drunk and they're shouting at each other and pretty much shout their feelings. I found that Guardians of the Galaxy 2 had a lot more of that. It had less of the understated emotional side of things, the quiet moments, and more of the shouting of feelings at each other and having a fight. I gotta be honest, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is possibly my biggest disappointment in the MCU so far.
Wow.
I think it's absolutely a much worse film than Guardians of the Galaxy 1. It's something that is a real missed opportunity, and it's a real shame because what I think this film gets right in particular is the characters. And I feel like in the second one, they were very much Flanderized, if you ever heard that phrase about The Simpsons, about how a character is just dialed up to one personality trait. Is you take a character who seems quite rounded at first, who seems quite interesting and fun, and they have a certain quirk about them.
Yeah.
And then the next time or over time you see that and they just ramp up that quirk. And that's what I felt Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was. It's like, Flanders in The Simpsons is at the beginning was just quite a nice neighbour. And then by the later Simpsons episode, he's this real sort of like God-bothering Christian fundamentalist do-gooder. It's that sort of level. And the biggest thing with Guardians 2 for me was the treatment of Drax.
Yeah.
Which I think is absolute rubbish. It goes from, he was actually genuinely funny in this. He's a straight man. He doesn't understand why what he's saying is funny. And that's why it's funny, because he is so deadpan about it. In the second one, he's making jokes about his nipples.
Yeah.
And standing still so he goes invisible and things like that. And it's like, well, hold on. This character wasn't just an idiot before, although he was an idiot. He was a literal character. And so therefore, the humour derived from that, not just from the fact that he was saying stupid shit. But in many ways, a lot of the things I liked about the characters was lost in the second one. And there was a lot more humour in this as well, I felt, that landed. A lot of the jokes in the second one didn't land for me at all.
Yeah. As you were explaining that, I was thinking, do you have a point here, or am I going to say no to it? But yeah, no, I do get that. And I think a lot of the second one's issues is that it's focused too much on his dad. I know that's the point. This one's about his mum, the second one's about his dad. But this one has the undertones of her passing and how it's affected him. The second one's very much in your face. This film's about your dad.
Yeah.
So I think it sidelines a lot of the other characters just to be like, look, it's your dad. Ego is your dad.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
And then they might have like one emotional scene for each of the characters. And it's like, oh, there we go. That's the bit of storytelling done for the rest of the team. Whereas this, it just felt much more natural throughout the film that each of those characters had a moment to shine. Each of them had a bit of emotional development. It was layered throughout not in a in-your-face way, but not exactly in a subtle way either. But it just, I don't know, it feels more complete. Whereas the second one, not so much for me anyway. So let's focus back onto Guardians of the Galaxy 1.
It's happened again.
I've spent a lot of time speaking about Guardians of the Galaxy 2 now. No, I mean, I spoke last episode about the terrible use of music in the Old Guard.
Yeah.
If you remember.
Yep.
And to me, this is the perfect example of incidental music done right in a film.
It's a fantastic soundtrack, I have to say.
It's really good. It's really, and Guardians by no means invented the use of pop music in films.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of dates back decades. And then obviously even in superhero films, we did Kick-Ass as an episode obviously before, and that has a very similar thing where you have a lot of pop music coming up in the action scenes and things like that. So very similar thing there. We've also actually seen it in James Gunn's The SuiSquad and also the original SuiSquad, which obviously, is vastly preferable in James Gunn's version than the original. But what I particularly like about it in this one, though, what I think is very clever, is that by establishing the soundtrack in universe, by actually making it a physical thing that the characters are listening to, you can transition between diegetic and non-diegetic music. Meaning not only can the audience hear and react to the songs and go, oh, it's this song, you can also see how the characters are reacting to these songs.
Yeah.
That's interesting because it makes it no longer just a catchy pop song that the filmmaker has chosen because he thought it would go well. And you go, oh, that will hit the action beats and it'll be fun. Instead, it's a shared experience.
Yeah.
It creates in the audience's mind a subconscious emotional connection between yourself and the characters. Even if you don't really know it, it's doing. It's what Edgar Wright's Baby Driver does well as well. By having that sound actually be diegetic to the film, having a character actually listening to it, it gives it a reason for being. Whereas the original SuiSquad, it was just, now here's another pop song for 30 seconds, and now here's another one, and it just throws at you. Whereas I think the use of music in this is really good.
It's so clever. I now think that you looked at my notes because I literally put down Gunn cleverly turns the soundtrack into diegetic music, which I think it's clear that you're the clever one on this podcast. You like to use big fancy words.
I do.
So when I was typing that up, I thought, that might make me sound clever. But no, you stole my thunder and you improved on it. So
yeah,
well done.
And if anything, you look even more stupid.
If anything, you're just saying, I knew that too.
What a fool. You just copied my word.
Well, I think we could probably talk about this film for hours.
Yeah.
I think we have done off air. So should we just hop over to the comics?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, it's good a time as any. So first of all, for the listeners, Annihilation, Conquest, Starlord is the comic book that we're reading. If you wish to look it up, Annihilation, Conquest, Starlord, which is easily wins the award for most punctuation in a 3-word title. It is a tie-in to the Annihilation Conquest event in Marvel Comics, which itself was a follow-up to the Annihilation event. These are crossovers that focus on Marvel's cosmic characters, predominantly Nova, which was being written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning at the time. Those two writers, known colloquially as DNA, became very much the architects of space-based Marvel at this time. They're the ones who ended up writing Guardians of the Galaxy after the comic book that we'll be reading today. Obviously, that's the comic that this film is really based on. But this comic that we're reading today, Annihilation, Conquest, Starlord, is where the team emerged, as it were. So, with that out of the way, Iain, what did you think of this comic book reading it for the first time?
It was definitely strange reading this after watching the MCU. And I'm not trying to make a pun there, Doctor Strange. I'm not trying to go for that.
I didn't even think... I just thought you used the word strange.
Well, sometimes I'm funny. I don't even intend to be. No, but this is not the same team. It's not the same vibe as the film. I know it's sort of come up in conversation so far, but it's very SuiSquad feel to it.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, there was a question I was going to ask you in a bit, but you actually kind of answered that in the intro there of the comic. I was going to say, is this just a closed, self-contained 4-issue, or is there more to it? Because I did see it said 1 of 4 on the cover of each.
Yeah.
Which normally they do that on like short runs. So you've literally explained that in the intro there, that it's part of a wider story arc.
It is, yeah.
Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. It is part of the Annihilation Conquest storyline, but in itself tells one complete story, so this tells one chapter of that.
Yeah.
So it can be read on its own, but it ties into a greater Marvel universe, literally the universe side of things.
Which I think I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say it's my favourite. Might surprise you. I'm not too sure what angle you thought I would take away from this.
I honestly didn't know what conclusions you'd come to for this. It's an interesting one. I wanted to read it because I obviously wanted to read a part of an event that wasn't the main title, like we did with Civil War. So, yeah, I just wanted to see what your opinion and your approach would be from that vantage.
Yeah, I think if you'd told me it was part of an overarching plot or world, if you will, I think I would have preferred to read the main run first and then read this. That's kind of what I did with Shadowland, a comic that I spoke about with Chrissy when she was on.
Yeah.
I read the actual proper story and then I went off to find the one-shots and the side sort of quests and all that sort of stuff. So I think maybe by not reading the main story, I've not enjoyed it as much as I would have if I had, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, it's so different to the characters and the story that's in the MCU. I know we have touched on in the past about they don't ever do page to screen adaptations in the MCU.
No.
You know, they have to work it into the plot already there and the world and interconnecting characters and story arcs and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But as its own story, I think it's a fun space adventure, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this comic book, but as you say, I've read the tie-ins or the crossover that it's part of.
Yeah.
You know, it is a tie-in to a crossover event. It can be read on its own and understood in complete isolation, I feel. I have read the other things, but I don't feel that you need to have read the other things to understand the story. That said, obviously, if you read all of it, you'll probably have a greater understanding of that. That's something a lot of tie-ins get wrong. And we even noted it in Civil War, that the core storyline feels very thin when reading it in isolation. You know, the actual 7 issues that make up Civil War are very set piece to set piece, and then, you know, it's over and that's it.
Yeah.
It's only through the reading of the 170 odd other titles that tie into it that flesh out that storyline. This is only 4 issues long, but to me, it feels like a complete story that happens to reference larger events.
Yeah, I would say that it's not the fact that I didn't understand it, because they do talk about things, they explain things well enough for you to still understand this kind of 4 comic run. But I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more to have read that stuff on my own than just someone saying, oh, that war that happened.
But that's what I like about this, is that you can read this and then you could go, right, well, I'm going to pick up Annihilation.
Yeah.
And you won't read Annihilation afterwards and think, oh, I've had something spoiled for me. You won't read this after reading Annihilation and say, now I finally understand the context of what's happening. Because both of them does a good job setting up all of that. Like you say, the tone is very different to the film.
Yep.
Ironically, like you said, actually, it's more akin to a sci-fi SuiSquad. It has a ragtag team of expendable prisoners being put together to form a suicide mission. Both this and Suicide Squad, of course, obviously take their inspiration from the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah.
Which I think Peter Quill even makes a reference to in this.
He does, yeah.
It's not a surprise. But yeah, the tone is very different and the characters are very different.
Yeah.
The film definitely takes its inspiration from the Abnett and Lanning Guardians of the Galaxy that came after this, which had Gamora, had Drax, had a few more of the characters, but they've still been changed for the screen. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the characters, what do you make of them here? Because obviously the lineup's a bit different, but we still have Peter Quill, Groot and Rocket. We've still got Mantis from the second one. And then I've got a couple of other characters.
You've got Captain Universe, which, fantastic name. I think that all teams have to have a captain. Even if he's not a leader, then it's fine. You've got a character called Bug and a character called Deathcry.
Yeah.
Who is a Shi'ar? Is that am I saying that
Shi'ar,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, which I think, as much as I've tried to block it out of my mind, I think they were in the Dark Phoenix film.
I don't think they were, actually.
Or mentioned in
Were they the Shi'ar? Maybe they were the Shi'ar.
I think so.
I
honestly
thought they
don't
were.
know.
They were meant to be the Skrulls, weren't they? They weren't the Shi'ar. They were meant to be the Skrulls, and then obviously because of Marvel using the Skrulls, they just ended up being a generic shape-changing alien.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I watched that film once and it's at the back of my head, so I didn't look it up. I cared so much about that film that I didn't look it up.
It's not good.
But yeah, you know, we've got a handful of characters that we know, handful of characters that we don't. The only main thing that I picked up on straight away is that Starlord's that kind of comedic, cocky character still. He says to a guy who's got scars on his face that he cut himself shaving or something, trying to be a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
And then with Groot, he actually speaks in this. He actually talks in English, which I don't know if that's supposed to do with Peter Quill's little implanted speech translator thing, or he just speaks.
Yeah, before the Abnett and Lanning run that came after this, Groot just spoke.
Right.
He just could speak in English. He would speak in full sentences. It was a later change that they thought was funny, basically, where he would only say, I am Groot. They later retconned it, I think, to I think they said something about as he got older, his larynx tightened and it restricted his speech.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, very much a retcon. Originally...
So a half-assed explanation.
Yeah, it's like, why can Groot only say those 3 words now? Because we thought it was funny is not good enough an explanation. Yeah, that's why they changed that. But then, like you say, you've got Peter Quill. He's still somewhat rough around the edges as a character. He's still a bit cocky, but he's a pragmatic and capable leader, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a very, like, I'm in charge, listen, you do what I say and we get on with it. All the decisions he makes are actually pretty efficient. He's not as bumbling as he is in the film in many ways.
Yeah. I think having an actor as Chris Pratt, you do have some of his humour in there and the bumblingness. In this, obviously, it's created for the page, so it's what the artist and the writer wants to make this character.
But yeah, I mean, obviously that changed hugely for the film, as is Mantis. As I said, you know, there's absolutely no hint of her being Celestial Madonna. There's no hint of her being human. You know, all of this stuff. The same way they've changed Drax for the film to be an alien, as opposed to in the comics where he is a human being who's been transformed. But that's a conversation for another comic.
There you go. Thanks for ruining that plot twist.
It's not a twist. That's his original origin.
I'm joking.
That's the opposite of a twist.
Something else that I'd like to point out, which I thought was so creative of the writers, is that Peter Quill's ship is called Ship.
Yep.
Which I just thought, I don't know if I find that a joke or not, or if...
Well, that comes from Peter Quill's origin. That's his other ship. Not actually read any of Peter Quill's older stuff, but they've destroyed Ship by this point. Ship is gone, but it was a sentient ship called Ship.
Right, okay.
But no longer here.
I just think that was daft.
But there's no references to his Master of the Sun, where he met. There's these comments in this comic book about how he met the Master of the Sun, how he was prophesized for something greater. None of that makes it into the film. He doesn't have his energy guns. He doesn't have any of it. The film does take huge liberties with the characters. The film, I find.
Yeah, it really does. I think with the comic as well, there are shocks. Like there was 2 points I was quite shocked, which was when Captain Universe kills Deathcry.
Yeah.
Kind of by accident, but not really. It happens.
He sort of throws his hands up in defense, doesn't he? And
Yeah.
blasts her to pieces, yeah.
Which I would have quite liked seeing something like that from James Gunn. You know, I'm not saying one of the main cast, but some sort of little nod to that. I mean, we've seen that in other works of his.
Yeah.
That these things happen, and it's like, oh God, I didn't mean that. What do I do? The character does get a little bit more of an arc after that, of he's in shock, you know, either snap out of it or go away kind of thing, is what Starlord says to him,
Yeah.
which is a bit disrespectful.
Again, it's that pragmatic nature of Starlord in the comic books that isn't really in the films. And I think it's a real shame that because of something called MCU synergy in the comic books, where they later try and make characters in the comic book more like their MCU counterpart.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's the one that people are coming into it. They're new fans. I think it's a real shame. Luckily, they have gone back on that somewhat with Peter Quill, because they really made him like his MCU counterpart with Bendis's run. God, that was terrible. So I'm so glad that they've undone all of that lately. But yeah.
And the second point, which I was quite shocked about, which after coming to the end of it, I I shouldn't have been that shocked, was when Groot dies.
Yeah.
Again, it all happens, and you're like, oh, bloody hell. And then pretty much immediately he comes back.
Yeah, he does. You get the little twig.
You turn for like 4 pages and he's back again.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay.
But that's essentially what happens at the end of the film in this one, isn't it? You know, the little twig
Yeah.
coming back and growing a new Groot afresh from that. So obviously that's where the inspiration for that came from. And like you say, both of those characters being killed off. There was a part where you thought Captain Universe was killed off as well, when he sacrifices himself. So it very much plays into those Dirty Dozen tropes of the characters are slowly going to be whittled down and killed off one by one on a suicide mission. And then there's a couple of bait and switches. I feel like they should have killed off maybe one more character for that to really apply, but I'm glad they didn't, because Bug, for instance, is a big member of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the comic books. He goes on to be a member of that main team, as does Mantis and things like that. So I'm glad that those ones stuck around. And these are characters, by the way, because for you, I suppose, you only really know these as the Guardians of the Galaxy, but these are characters kind of like the Avengers, but space-based Marvel. They're all taken from their own comic books, all these little storylines from all over the place. You know, so there's Rom and the Space Knights, there's Starlord himself, there's Celestial Madonna, who was turned up in various Avengers comic books, and there's Nova and all of these other characters. And, you know, there's Groot, who is from a 1960s Stan Lee comic book, like a one-off about Planet X. So they brought back all of these obscure sci-fi characters and created a team and a crossover out of them. And that's what I really like about it. It's not like this was an existing team. Guardians of the Galaxy, by the way, is an existing team. It was one set in the future. It was all space-based people. Nothing to do with this. But you do see that original team turn up in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, led by Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Mm-hmm. With the silver sparkly head man played by Michael Rosen.
Yeah, Lex Luthor.
From Smallville?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he was. But all of those guys in that were the original lineup of the Guardians of the Galaxy, essentially.
Yeah.
They just used the name for this new team.
So just to sort of put it back with the film overall, I guess. Ronan, obviously you spoke about him earlier on. Mm-hmm. He comes up in the comic. He's not in the comic, but his name comes up.
Yeah.
So you've read a lot more of this than I have. Did Starlord work for him, or were they friends? What was the sort of story there?
So they fought together in the Annihilation War.
Right.
So there was the the Annihilation Wave, which is the enemy was Annihilus, who was an old Fantastic Four villain. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was all this the storyline about basically just huge swarm of insects, essentially trashing the universe, all spreading out. And you had all of these cosmic heroes, including Thanos and things like that, mm-hmm. coming together to fight them, like the last vestiges of all these different societies, right. coming together to fight back. And that's where I believe Ronan and Starlord got to know each other in terms of fighting alongside each other, essentially. And I think that's why there's references in this comic book to them respecting each other, to him saying Ronan has told us that, you know, we have to do what you say because you're in charge.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's because both of them proved themselves to each other essentially in the Annihilation War.
Right. Okay, that makes more sense then.
And this is what I mean about Ronan in the comics being quite a noble character. He's a leader of people. You know, he's a more heroic character than he is in the film, where he's very much a 2D villain.
Yeah, with a very, very tiny story arc of him betraying Thanos. Well, I think we've somehow spoke about other comics as well, but let's wrap up this segment before...
I've spoken about other comics in the comic section and other films in the film section. I feel like I've spent very little time actually talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. But yeah, let's go on to Easter eggs and we'll come back to this for the conclusion. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you. So, his name has come up a lot in this episode so far. James Gunn. There's apparently still an Easter egg out there that people haven't found, according to him. And I found it today. I haven't.
All I'm going to say is if people haven't found that Easter egg, then it's not an Easter egg. Right? If you can't find it and it's not prevalent enough.
I was doing some research into this hidden Easter egg.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is, but I think it's got something to do with the planet coordinates that come up underneath each planet when it turns up on screen.
Right.
So the Dark Astra, the code has been decrypted to say this is mum's cancer. The prison, the Kiln, I think it is, mm-hmm. the code says this isn't real, and nowhere the coordinates translates to Meredith Quill.
Right.
So those are the only three that are found online that have been translated. So there's a bunch of other ones that haven't been.
Okay.
But if you have a look at James Gunn on Twitter, he does comment back to people and say, "Oh, you're almost there. You're on the right sort of tracks." So I think it's got something to do with that.
Do you reckon he's just doing that to pretend that there's one more out there and he's just stringing people along as it creates conversation?
I mean, possibly.
And do you think that even if someone did come up with one that was the final one, would he actually say, "You've got it, good work, everyone go home"? Or would he just ignore that?
Well, considering this film came out, 6 years ago, 7 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I mean, he might have just put in something that you can't translate at all.
I just don't think there is one. I think he's lying.
Okay, well.
I think if there was, someone probably guessed it ages ago and he went, no, that's not it. It's someone else.
Well, let's go on to eggs that I enjoy in this film.
Okay.
And the comic, you'll be quite pleased to know.
Ooh.
So, at the start, we've said that when Starlord goes to get the orb, he uses this sort of projector thing.
Yeah.
Where you do see a hologram of a girl and a dog.
Mm-hmm.
That dog is actually James Gunn's dog.
Yes, I know he tries to bring it to set.
Poor little puppy.
Gets it tax written off.
And you know there's that girl, Berit?
Mm-hmm.
She's in Quill's ship when he finally has the orb and he comes back and he does flips and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I forgot you were there. The T-shirt that she wears is the same T-shirt that Starlord was taken when he was a kid.
Yeah?
So it's his childhood T-shirt.
Oh.
Which again, I just quite like that. And as always with an MCU film, there was a infamous Stan Lee cameo.
There was.
But this one has a clever Easter egg hidden on screen. His catchphrase, Excelsior, can be seen on screen, but it actually uses the language of the Skrulls.
Oh.
So in Skrull on screen, it says Excelsior.
Oh.
That's a nice little egg in a cameo.
In an egg.
In an egg.
In an enigma. No, that's nice.
It's an egg
that's
in
nice.
a cameo in an Easter egg segment of a podcast about the Guardians.
What?
And my last egg, then, actually, it's a bit of both. So it's used in the film, and it's also used in the comic.
Okay.
It's a word called dast. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
It's
Dast.
So it's a common sort of swear word or curse word used in the MCU, which I picked up on it when I was reading the comic and just thought, that's an annoying word, and thought it's a space word, whatever. And then when I was watching the film, Rocket says that to Groot as well. So it's made its way across into the films, which I quite like that they incorporate random things from the comic, which, as we've already said, brought in some, not brought in others.
Yeah. It's a good Easter egg. The Dast good one.
It sounds German.
Dust is good one. Alright, we're bordering on offensive here, so let's move on. Back to the conclusion. Right, the film, the comic book, what were your thoughts overall?
As we've already said, it's a fantastic film. It's one of my favourites. James Gunn really does well at bringing this unknown team to the screen.
Yeah.
Before I move on to the comic, what were your views of the film?
No, I really enjoy it as well. As I say, it's one of my top 5 MCU films. I think it has a really tightly structured plot, and I think it manages to give each of those characters time to shine. I think the balancing act there, it's something that I've seen done wrong many times in the past, but I think it's something this film really gets right.
Oh, yeah. That's so true. There's so many films out there that you're like, right, let's put a ragtag group together, and it's just like, this is terrible. Just don't bother.
Yeah. It's either you end up with one central protagonist and a bunch of ancillary characters. See, for instance, Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. Absolutely terrible film with the most forgettable side characters I've ever seen in my life, and it keeps framing it like this is a big group heist, and instead it's just a bunch of nobodies you don't care about because they're not given a personality.
That's actually on my list.
Oh, really?
But, I mean, it says something when I can't be asked to watch a film.
Yeah, because you will literally watch any old shit, won't you?
When I think, that might be a waste of 2 hours.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's over 2 hours long, that film. It has no right to be.
Right, it's happened again.
All right,
let's
sorry.
put it back to this comic.
So what did you think of the comic?
Yeah, I mean, it was all right. It's not too exciting. As I said earlier, it's a fun space adventure. It's a little group off on mission. It's a very quick read. I don't think I've said that so far.
Yeah, it's only 4 issues, isn't it?
Yeah, an hour or so, a tad more potentially. You put it down and there's not much to take away from it.
Yeah.
It's not a world-changing comic. You're not going to come away and change your views of other things because of this particular run. It makes me want to read more.
Good.
But more of the Annihilation War, if that's what it's called.
Yep. Wow. So the events are called Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest, the 2 events.
Right, okay.
This one stems from the second of which. Yeah, but absolutely. No, I agree. I think it's a really good self-contained 4 issues. Like you say, it isn't a massive culminating event, this storyline. The larger one is, but what I think this does well is tell a self-contained storyline within the scope of a greater crossover.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, I think it does a really good job.
Yeah, so it's something that I might come back to read, the whole overarching plot.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, we always tend to ask if there's any sort of way to read or watch these, but I think they're so far apart that it doesn't really matter.
I think if you were to read this story, it naturally leads on to the Guardians of the Galaxy in the comic book.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I'd say if you were going to do that, you should read first, then watch. But if you're just going to read this comic book in isolation and then decide whether to watch the film, it doesn't matter at all. No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And this comic book, as you said, is relatively throwaway. So I don't think it's necessary reading for anything. It's just quite an enjoyable comic. Quite a fun read.
I think you might be a little disappointed if you'd watched the film or the first two films and then read this comic, because it's a different style entirely.
Yeah, it has been adapted in the strongest possible sense to the screen. It is not the same thing. It isn't just someone putting it up on screen. It is taking the characters we get in the comic books and running with them and making them their own thing.
Yeah.
So I would recommend the comic book. What I would recommend is, as we said, go back and read from the beginning of Annihilation as opposed to jumping in with this.
Mm-hmm.
But I would recommend this whole era of Marvel cosmic storytelling was excellent in general. And lastly, what is Kate's opinion of the film?
Well, her opinion is I am Groot, which I think roughly translates to it's a fantastic film and one of her favourites.
Good. That roughly.
I think so. My Groot translation's not that great, to be honest.
Well, thank you for that. Any other business?
Yes. 2 words for you.
Oh.
1 word for you.
Okay.
SuiSquad.
Not the SuiSquad.
The SuiSquad.
2 words
I
again.
finally saw it, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, okay. Yes, we've actually mentioned this a few times on the podcast now about the SuiSquad, James Gunn's new film, and this seems like the good time to talk about it. So you've now seen it.
Yes.
What were your thoughts? I suppose we don't know what we're going to discuss, so keep it spoiler light, but just be warned there may be spoilers. Is that probably...
Yeah, I'd say there's something that I'll say, but I'll put a spoiler warning just before it.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say it's bloody fantastic.
I knew you'd like it.
Do you get it? I said bloody.
No, I heard you, yeah.
No, you were right. This is my kind of film.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was great. This next bit I'm going to say is a little bit spoilery, so skip ahead a couple of minutes. I don't know. But I love the opening fight scene, the old switcheroo, which did get me. I was watching that thing.
Did it?
Well, not all of them, but I didn't think they were the different team.
Right.
I thought it was going to go, some of them will die, and then they'll come back, and then they'll do a second team and go on their way again. I didn't think that this was like the side team. This was the distraction.
Yes, the bait and switch, isn't it, of it?
Yeah, I thought this was the main goal. Then they would have failed. Then they would have regrouped, and then gone off again.
See, I thought it was so obvious from the trailers that first team that you see all walking in line, you see loads of stuff of them together in the trailer, and then you don't see them in any of the other locations. You only see the other team. So I thought it was a really obvious thing that first team, as soon as they were up in the helicopter, apart from obviously the 2 that you do see in other scenes in the trailer, which are Joel Kinnaman and Margot Robbie.
Yeah.
I thought obviously everyone else is going to die. And then it happened. I was a bit like, okay, well, that was pretty obvious. I thought obviously it was going to be then, right, back to the drawing board, let's get another team together.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it would be a distraction. But yeah, apart from that.
I am quite sad that Cap Boomerang died.
Yeah.
As I said, every team needs a captain. But yeah, that to me was not sad because I don't really care. But I was like, oh, they've killed one of my characters that I like. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go home and cry about it, but I was quite shocked. Maybe it was James Gunn's way of putting a finger up to the last film.
I just think it was you couldn't just have the 3 characters from the first film surviving this as well. So I think you needed those stakes to show that anyone is expendable. It's something that the comics have always done. It's always been a case of everyone is expendable. I think very recently they killed Deadshot off in the comics.
Yeah, I tried to stay away from as much as I could regarding all that sort of stuff. I watched a couple of the trailers, but not over and over again, and didn't go into the Easter egg hunting that I tend to do. So yeah, when it kind of happened, I was very much like, oh, okay, so that's happened. And yeah, a lot of the deaths actually shocked me with how violent that they all were, which I loved. It was fantastic.
It very much felt like a mission statement at the beginning of the film. It very much said, look, this is what kind of film it's going to be.
Yeah.
Get used to it. And then almost then it doesn't fulfill that because the rest of the team goes in and only like half of them are killed off. But again, another spoiler warning, I suppose. The other thing that I thought was impressive was making me care about characters that I wouldn't necessarily have cared about otherwise. And that's what I think James Gunn does well in this, Guardians of the Galaxy, but also in this new one. The main one is, spoiler warning, Joel Kinnaman's Rick Flag.
Yeah.
Who in the first one, I could literally not give less of a shit about him.
He was a dick, wasn't he? A massive dick.
Who's this character? Oh, this is Soldier. This is named Soldier as opposed to unnamed soldiers in the background. And that was his character. He was there to be the leader and also then just occasionally tell people about powers. This is Katana. I suggest you don't get killed by her. Okay. I wasn't planning on it. Thanks.
All right, well, I'll try and not be killed by anyone.
Yeah,
really.
good idea. Generally detrimental to your health.
Oh, don't die.
Yeah.
Don't die. Right, sorry. I got confused.
Well,
there. I thought it was
he turned out in this film one of my favourite characters. I was surprised by that, watching this, going, oh, actually, when everything goes sideways in the missions at the end, you feel that it has some emotional stakes.
Yeah.
As I said, it's a bit irreverent for me. It reminds me more of Guardians 2 than Guardians 1.
Right.
And we've already discussed my feelings on that. And I think in the podcast I've mentioned about Deadpool as well, and Deadpool 2 has that similar sort of thing as where they've just ramped everything up to 10 and it annoys me a little bit. So as I said a few weeks back, I think this is going to be more of your film than it is mine. But I liked it. I wanted to like it a little bit more, but I did really like it.
Right, okay. I mean, also, I can't help but think that the script that James Gunn created was made with Will Smith's Deadshot in mind,
Yeah.
and then had to do a little quick change and go, actually, it's a new guy called Bloodsport.
Yeah.
Because it's the same character, really.
It is the same character, but Idris Elba is much better than Will Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I am a fan of Will Smith over the years.
What was the last good Will Smith role?
There's a film called £7. I don't know how old it is. That's really good.
I bet you look that up, it's going to be 15 years old. I don't think Will Smith's done anything good for years, decades. Over a decade, I would say easily. When did you do Ali?
Okay, so I did my famous live on the podcast research, and it's 2008.
Oh, wow, okay.
That's quite a good film. But yeah, I would have been quite intrigued to see what his character would have become under the wing of James Gunn. And I didn't mean that to rhyme. It just sort of did. Because he changed characters like Harley, he changed characters like Flag. A little bit of change on Cap Boomerang, but
Not much.
not
Nah,
much.
he's pretty the same. But he was one of the better things about the first film.
Yeah,
So.
well, there you go. So I would have, in hindsight, liked to have just seen a little bit of what that character could have been. But I think, even though I am a fan of him, you are right that Idris Elba brings that gravitas, I guess, that role.
It's supposed to gravitas, but in this he's a real coarse character. I like that he's a pro dealing with a bunch of amateurs, and it's clearly exasperating for him that it gave me a lot of chuckles.
Yeah, well, yeah, to be fair, there was a lot of points in this film that I laughed. Even points that I laughed and I thought, why am I laughing? That is grotesque. But I was still like, look at his face, he got blown off. But it's because of the way that it's done, is that these shocks come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And this guy double-crossed him, then he double-crossed him again, and again. And it's the old switcheroo, but like 4 times almost. It was just heavily improved on with the first one. I know that you hated the first one and I didn't mind it.
I think the first one is one of the worst films
ever made.
No, that's probably not true, but it's definitely it's one of the few, I'd say, about a dozen films on Letterboxd that I've given a 1 star to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would it not allow you to go less?
No, you can give 0. I just don't. In terms of the DCEU films, it's my second least favourite, which tells you how well the DCEU's doing. That a film I hate is not my least favourite.
What's your least?
That'll be Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Oh, well, yep, I could have probably answered that question. Why did you say that film?
And before anyone complains, yes, I've only watched the director's cut. No, it's still rubbish.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Well, that's the SuiSquad.
On that bombshell, should we wrap this up then?
I think we probably should. That's the SuiSquad, and that's Guardians of the Galaxy done for this week. If you enjoyed Annihilation, Conquest, Starlord, and you want to read more of Cosmic Marvel, then boy howdy do I have some good news for you. Start with Annihilation and the tie-ins and work your way all the way through to the Thanos Imperative, and you'll have plenty to keep you busy for the time being. If you're looking to jump into something a bit more recent, then I can recommend Al Ewing's current Guardians of the Galaxy run, which has been excellent so far. Just make sure you skip the Bendis stuff in between, because that was trash. For more invaluable advice like this, make sure you subscribe to Become the Teapot on your preferred listening platform. If you have any questions or comments and want to get in touch, you can email us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. We're also available on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Reddit. Whew. Next time, we are not reading or watching anything. That's because it's our 1-year anniversary episode. Yes, you might not know it listening to us, but we have been doing this podcast for a whole year. To celebrate, we'll be looking back at our previous episodes and holding our very own, extremely prestigious award ceremony. And you, dear listeners, are most cordially invited. I am so hungover.